Hey, it's Botch here from Films by Botch. This is the camera crane that I've made. I'm going to show you how to make it and run you through it using basic backyard things. You've got a tripod, which is a surveyor's tripod. Then the main boom is made out of some concrete screeds that they pull down through the concrete. Then you've got the adjustable arm that's also off of another concreter's pole where they drag the concrete through. So I'm going to run you through it and see what it can do. The base is made out of a tripod. I've put some brackets down the bottom and made another A-frame out of some tent poles, and they're just mounted loosely so that when I do extend the tripod, the poles also move a little bit to give me the full height. So I just leave those long bolts, long through bolts, loose. I've ground out the surface in here, which takes the thrust bearing and holds it in the centre. And also I've made this plate out of steel, which sits under one of the bolts, the original bolts. And that'll hold the plate in there, and that'll also centre the rest of the apparatus, the rest of the centre bearing when it's on there. It's a nice thick plate so it won't bend like the original piece of aluminium that was there. Okay, next we have the centre bearing, which is just a clutch thrust bearing off a car, which is welded onto two brackets of steel, and the hole at the top is where the main pivot goes through, and the other hole here is the centering hole. The other small holes aren't necessary, but I just put them in there for its future adjustment. The other small piece there is welded on for the monitor mount. The thrust bearing is already mounted onto the bracket here when it comes as part of the clutch bearing for a car. And then through the middle of there we put the bearing, which is just a standard bearing. It's a 6302 bearing. Put a bolt through the middle of that, and then that sits down in the recess that I've made in there. It'll also centre itself as well. And then when I bolt that through the tripod, I've got another nut. It's welded onto an old piece of steel with a handle, so I can screw that nut in from the bottom. That'll also give me some adjustment of how tight the bearing is and how easy it is to turn the whole camera crane around. Next we have the bearing, which is a thrust bearing. It just sits together like that. It works quite well for what it does. You've got two of those either side of the boom. Now the thrust bearings go either side of the screeds. Put the bolt through. That'll give it a nice point to pivot on. And you can also adjust the tension of how tight you want them or how loose. So you can make it a lot easier to manipulate the crane. Also it's got a nice smooth pivot on the bottom bearing. Also up the other end we have the same two bearings, either side of the pivot for the camera head, and the little plastic bushes which are mounted there as well. Now the boom is made up of the two concrete screeds which I've joined together at the ends. I've done that by a piece of flat aluminium with a lot of bolts on one side, and also on the other side of the aluminium I have some angle iron, as well as I've used the original handle from one of the screeds for a bit more support. And, the angle iron here, I've put a couple of wing nuts in that as well, so I can remove that and take the handle off the top, the angle iron off, and the adjuster rod down the bottom, and I can fit that into the back of my car. Now the upright here, that's to hold the cable up. Now the cable is protected by a piece of fuel line hose on the top there to stop it from rubbing through, and you do need the cable because without the cable it does sway fairly badly. Now down the other end we've got the tilt adjuster handle. You can also undo the nut here and slide the rod backwards and forwards to give me adjustment and level it down the other end. Now with the connections, I have a AV plug which plugs into the back of the camera. That's connected to 3 AV leads which run down the length of the boom. I can also connect audio to that later on if I wanted to. Got the monitor which is mounted onto a old desk lamp stand which kind of needs a bit more improvement. That's running back up here to the battery which is also acting as a counterweight. And I've got a fire extinguisher bracket which I've modified to hold the battery. Then down the back we've got the dumbbell weights which I can load on either side, which will counterbalance the camera when it's mounted on the rig. That's also where the adjuster is for the tension cable, and that's just a nut that's welded onto the bolt which goes straight through the aluminium screed. As you can see, it does get a bit of sideways shake. Also, I can put a pin through the pivot point down below, which I've since replaced with bushes and another pin. Level up the fluid head on the tripod by adjusting the adjusting pole. That keeps it nice and level. And as the crane goes up, it will keep the float on a level plane on the horizon. You get nice, smooth, steady shots all the way up to the full height. Now I'm just adding the weights here, which I'm running about 6 kilos either side. Now let's check out some test footage. You'll probably be better off looking at my other video on the Supersize camera crane for how I put it together and used it the first time that I really had it out to do a few test runs down the river. So you'll see a lot better instructional video there of how I assembled it and how it does actually work out in the field. Also, if you wanted to check out my DIY camera slider, you'll see the link to that in the description down below. If you've got any comments or feedback, I'd love to hear them, so post them down below or send me an email or jump onto filmsbybotchs.com and leave a message on there. Thank you and good luck with your build. We'd love to see what you can build. If you used any of my ideas, I'd love for you to share them. Thanks, and if you're thinking of building one of these cranes, why don't you shoot me an email in the reply with a video of what you've built, and I hope some of my ideas have been useful. Cheers.